Today, I unveil my plan for filling a hole of nearly $500 million in the state budget, a crisis created by a global economic maelstrom, largely beyond our control, and set in motion long before I became governor. Let me make one point clear at the outset. We cannot make progress tomorrow by going significantly backward in vital areas like education, health care, and public safety today. My goal is to help Kentucky not only survive this economic crisis, but to survive with our abilities and our ambition intact. I am determined that when we emerge from this fiscal crisis, that we emerge not shattered, shell-shocked, and lethargic, but prepared and eager to take advantage of the opportunities ahead. This will require a concerted strategy that neither abandons Kentucky's families nor decimates our ability to educate and train a workforce equipped with the talent and brain power for an increasingly sophisticated and highly competitive world. We must protect our priorities. This strategy will become clear as I reveal details of my plan. But first, let me put this plan in some context for you. When I took office exactly 1 year ago, I inherited a $434 million shortfall that required immediate spending cuts and other moves in a fiscal year that was already half over. I then implemented an austere new budget for fiscal years 2009 and 2010. Living within this budget has mandated fiscal discipline and efficiency, day in and day out. Unfortunately, fiscal discipline has not been enough. The national economy has continued to shrink. It has dragged Kentucky and many other states down with it. With everything from corporate income to sales tax trending downward, the state's independent economic forecasters project that general fund revenues will fall $456.1 million short by June 30. Let's look at what we have already done this year. As many of you know, we have already reduced spending in state government by about $430 million. When you take education at 44%, post-secondary education at 13.8%, Medicaid at 13%, and the criminal justice system, and that includes a lot of other things, but corrections is a part of that. But when you take K through 12 education, higher education, Medicaid, and corrections, those four areas take up almost 80% of general fund monies in Kentucky. I point that out because it makes it even more significant when you are making reductions as to the amount of reductions you make in the last 20% of government. As you recall, we have exempted SEEK from reduction so far in that $430 million that we've reduced. I believe Medicaid was exempt. Higher education, I believe, was reduced by 6%, and some others were reduced smaller amounts. But as a result of the exemptions that we have made to date in things like the SEEK formula for K through 12, cutting higher education less, exempting Medicaid, you'll see some of the rest of the reductions that have been made so far this year. If you look at all these other areas of state government, these are some examples of how much their budgets have been reduced already. Now, this is before we even begin talking about what we're going to do to make up with this $456 million shortfall. Economic development, their budget has already been reduced 20%. The constitutional officers, they've been reduced 16 to 18%. KET, 18%. Local libraries, 18%. Military affairs, 14%. Environmental protection, 13%. Natural resources, 12%. Veterans affairs, 11%. State police, 10%. Other health-related services, 6%. It is not readily apparent to a lot of Kentuckians really what a lot of these agencies do. But I think it's important to note that the activities that go on here protect the health and safety of Kentuckians in many circumstances. You're talking about water quality inspectors. You're talking about air quality inspectors. You're talking about state forestry workers that go out and fight forest fires in our state. You're talking about public health departments that deliver such vital direct health services to our citizens in this state. Economic development, you're talking about our efforts to bring new jobs and create new jobs for Kentucky. So I wanted to set the stage here a little bit in terms of talking about what we're going to propose to do to balance this current shortfall by showing you what we've already done. And the fact that there's been a lot of state government that delivers vital services to our state that have already taken significant cuts. And we have to be careful that we will be able to continue to deliver the basic services that our people need and want to protect them and to render them safe. That's where we are. We've got to come up with $456.1 million in further reductions to balance this budget. We considered a number of options. If you just want to make an across-the-board cut, once you exempt a few things that you really can't cut. I mean, Medicaid is already in a deficit. Pretty hard to make any further cuts in that. And a few other things like debt service and things that you're going to have to do at a state government level because you're obligated to do it. You would basically have to make a 6% across the board cut in order to balance this budget and make up this shortfall. That would be 6% to K through 12, higher education, all of the other areas that we've talked about. We rejected that option. We rejected it because I have some priorities for this state. Those priorities, I think, are shared by the vast majority of Kentuckians. And those priorities are the education of our children. Those priorities include basic health care for our most vulnerable. And those priorities include public safety for our people. And so we adopted those three priorities as the priorities of the Beshear administration that are reflected in our proposal of how to balance this budget. We then looked at, can we balance this budget keeping those priorities in mind without new revenue? And quite honestly, that would be our preference. I think that would be everyone's preference, is to be able to make up this $456.1 million somehow by recognizing those priorities and at the same time not having to raise any additional revenue. But here are the effects. If we exempt the SEEK formula, which is about 85% of the Department of Education's funding, that's the formula that is the lifeblood for the school districts around this state. If we just exempt the SEEK formula and Medicaid and debt service and those kinds of things, every other agency, including higher education and all the other agencies, would take an 11% additional cut. If we exempted the SEEK formula and higher education and Medicaid and the debt service areas and that kind of thing, every other agency in state government would take a 17% additional cut in order to balance this budget. I find that untenable, and I find it unacceptable, particularly when so many of these agencies have already taken 15 to 18 to 20% cuts already. And if they're faced with another 10, 15, 20% cut, many of them would basically have to close their doors because they could not be effective. Now, some Kentuckians might say, well, that wouldn't be a bad idea, until they realize that what we're talking about are those basic kinds of vital services that I mentioned to you. Air quality inspectors, health inspectors, water quality people that give us clean drinking water, make sure we have clean drinking water, forest fire fighters, all of those kinds of basic things that we take for granted. Many of them would be devastated if we put huge additional cuts on them. What that told me, and therefore what I'm proposing, is to create some new revenue for Kentucky. My plan includes adopting a 70-cent increase in the cigarette tax and a significant increase in the tax on other tobacco products. Our plan to balance would still include spending cuts. We've got to further reduce state government. So spending cuts would produce $147.1 million to fill up that hole. The tobacco tax increases are another $81.5 million. As you know, even if we are successful in passing a 70-cent cigarette tax increase and our proposal for other tobacco products, it will only go into effect perhaps in April because of the timing. And so we wouldn't have a full year's source of revenue there. It would produce, we estimate, about $81.5 million. The use of the rainy day fund at $178.9 million. Here's what we would propose to do there. As most of you know, there's only $35 million of the rainy day fund available for this fiscal year. The rest of the rainy day fund, or most of the rest of it, was appropriated for use in the next fiscal year. What we would propose to do is, once we pass the cigarette tax, we will bring up $144 million and add it to the $35 million. We'll bring up $144 million of the rainy day fund from the second year, where it has been appropriated the second year of the biennium, and put it into this year, first year of the biennium, to help balance this budget. And we will replace that money next year by a full year of cigarette tax and other tobacco product tax increases. And so it will make next year the same as it is right now. It will make next year no worse than what it may be once we take a look at it and have to start addressing next year. So next year